Welcome to Rex's Bible Minute, a weekly video where we talk about Jesus, Christianity, and anything along those lines. We are in Revelation chapter 20, getting so close to the end of this book. We've been going since March, so yeah, we might be done by the end of the year. We've got to go through 21 and 22, and these are my favorite parts of this book. These are the parts that I find the most relevant to our lives and how we can live our lives based on them. It's one of the few parts of Revelation where I'm like, yeah, I'm certain of this, and I'm going to hang a theological hat on that hook. So really excited about the next couple chapters. But we've got to get through this last little controversial part, the part where people like to argue. And again, as always, all that kind of stuff doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on it, because it's ultimately we're just along for the ride. And so this stuff about how God's going to wrap up his creation, how he's going to deal with evil, and exactly the order and how all that works, that's not the point. The point is to be encouraged that God will do all of that, and that we just need to remain faithful through all of that. Train of thought, as always, purpose of Revelation is to encourage people who are living in a world dominated by evil, that the nations and the powers, not just, geopolitical nations, not just geopolitical powers, but, the cultural powers of this world, how those of us who are suffering, and I wouldn't really say I'm suffering, but those Christians out there, especially those ones who are physically suffering, but those who are at odds with their society because they follow Jesus, this book should be encouraging to us to trust that God is going to make things right, and what he has done has already won the victory. And so it's our job to remain faithful as we go through difficulties because of our faith. And so we've seen the whore was the personification of our greed, our perversion of God's goodness, us taking the good things God made and twisting them. We've seen the beast, which is the puppet. In Revelation's case, it was the Roman Empire, but there's been lots of beasts throughout history. These are the puppet powers of this world that the enemy, that the devil uses to corrupt and to destroy. The prophet are those people who support the beasts throughout history, who are sold out to them and force others to worship the beast. And then the dragon itself is the devil. And so thus far, we've seen the first three dealt with, right? We've seen the whore, we've seen the beast, we've seen the prophet. They're done with. Jesus has dealt with them. Then last week we looked at a very controversial section about the 1,000-year reign. And again, I think it's just insane that there are people who split denominations and left churches over that. It's a huge waste of an argument, huge waste of your time. It has nothing to do with how you live your life right now. And so we looked at that, and we looked at the 4 different perspectives. So if you're curious about that, go back and watch last week's episode, or listen to it if you're listening to the podcast version, which, if you're unaware, we do have an audio-only podcast. Just look up Rex's Bible Minute on anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. It's on them all. And so we looked last week about how there's going to be this peace, and Jesus will reign. And at the end of it, we finished with verse 7, that after the 1,000 years, whatever that means, the Satan will be released again. So let's pick up there. We're going to start with verse 7. We ended with verse 7 last week. We're going to start with verse 7. Then we'll finish out this chapter, and we'll just kind of break it down. So verse 7 says, "When the 1,000 years are complete, the Satan will be released from his prison. Out he will come to deceive the nations at the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog. He will summon them for battle, a throng like the sand of the sea in number. They came up over the full width of the earth and closed in on the place where God's holy people are encamped, and the beloved city. The fire came down from heaven and burnt them up. And the devil, who had deceived them, was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the monster and the false prophet had already been thrown. They will be tortured day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a large white throne, and the one who was sitting on it. Earth and heaven fled away from his presence, and there was no room left for them. Then I saw the dead, great and small, standing in front of the throne. Books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged on the basis of what was written in the books, in accordance with what they had done. The sea gave back the dead that were in it. Death and Hades gave back the dead that were in them, and each were judged in accordance with what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone was not found written in the book of life, they were thrown into the lake of fire." So let's look at this first section, all the way up to verse 10. All right, so Satan is released. And all of a sudden, there's another big battle. Now, the way this makes the most sense to me is this whole section, the 1,000-year reign saga and all that, is really just another viewpoint of how God wraps up evil. That's kind of the way that makes the most sense to me. Again, not going to hang a theological hat on it because it ultimately doesn't matter. You're along for the ride. Be faithful. That's the point here. Be encouraged. God's going to make things right. But what we're seeing here is, again, it follows along with the same pattern as earlier, where God allows evil to expose itself. He allows evil to run rampant, to expose itself, destroy itself, and then he ultimately deals with it once and for all. So we see that after the 1,000-year reign, Satan is let out. Now, I find it interesting that the word there is the Satan. Now, if you watched our Sunday mornings over the last 3 weeks, where the series is called Arrow Monsters, if you're watching this later on down the line. But we've been looking at an actual explanation of the spiritual world, beyond just angels good, demons bad, one God above. There's a whole lot more to it than that the Bible teaches. And so we've been talking about that. And one of the things we discussed was these supernatural beings, which the word the Bible uses is Elohim, spirit beings. They have the different words that are used for them in the Bible, especially the Old Testament. They're not just, this is an angel, this is a demon. The Old Testament doesn't even use the word demon. But what I'm getting at is the words they use are some of them are describing what they are. Some of them are describing what they do. Some of them are describing their rank. Right? And so here we see Satan. Now, Satan it means the accuser, ha-satan. John uses the word devil in other places. The devil is the name of the guy, right? That's the name of the fallen angel, the Ezra, the cherub guardian that was cast out, the serpent from the garden. That's his name is the devil. So when it uses the Satan here, John's being intentional, because the Satan is a job, not a name, right? So in Job, we see the Satan shows up in heaven. That's the guy who has a job. His job is to go about the earth and report back to God and accuse humanity who has done wrong. Okay? So we see here that the devil is the Satan. He is the accuser of humanity. And so if we look at this pattern that we've seen all the way throughout Revelation of evil being allowed to expose itself, evil destroying itself, Satan is released to get the last remnants of it, to destroy it, to expose it. And then he's finally dealt with. Think of it this way. I'm on the fire department. When we go on medical calls, one of the first things we do, even before we get out of the trucks, is put on protective gloves. We put on vinyl gloves. We put on those rubber medical gloves, and then we go to work, right? Like we patch people up. We check pulses. We do all the things we need to do to stabilize somebody, try to save their lives, try to get them ready to go to the hospital. Once we're done, we take those gloves off in a special way where we don't touch the outside of them, and we throw them in the trash. We get rid of them. Those gloves are a tool that when we're done with, we get rid of. That's the way you need to think of the devil, all right? He is a tool that God is using. Now, this tool is corrupting the job God gave him, right? Initially, the Satan is a good job. It is a job that is necessary to help administrate and rule, the universe. God created it for a good reason, but the devil has corrupted it and accuses everybody, and he falsely accuses everybody, and he lies, etc., etc. But the point is that this is a tool that God is going to throw away when he is done with. And so he corrupts the four corners of the earth, calls them Gog and Magog. That's a callback to a verse in Ezekiel. And again, John's doing that intentionally. But the point here is that there will be rebellious people. So that's why I think this makes most sense as being just another view of Revelation in general. That God allows the rebellious people to expose themselves, these people who follow the devil, who are caught up in his plots. But regardless, the point is that the devil finally exposes everything once and for all, and then God disposes of him. He is thrown into the lake of sulfur. He's thrown into hell, where they will be tortured day and night forever and ever. It is the worst punishment imaginable. And so then we see things change. We see a new throne, a large white throne. It's kind of implied that this is the judgment throne. And so we see the throne there. Jesus is here, and we see that everybody is brought back. So this is the great resurrection. everybody is brought back to stand before this throne. And it says that the sea gave back the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave back the dead that were in them. What's that mean? In the ancient world, the sea was kind of viewed as a separate holding tank per se, right? So if somebody dies at sea, well, you can't recover the body. So the sea holds on to those bodies, whereas the ones that you bury, well, those ones, you know where they're at. So this isn't, again, supposed to be necessarily. There are some people who go and they wait in the sea, and some wait in Hades, in the realm of the dead. That's just, this is the ancient worldview. And so we see that the dead are all raised. That's the point, right? Whether they come from the sea or they come from Hades, they all come back and they stand before God, and they're judged based on what's written in these books. Now, for Christians, that judgment is judgment to reward. What have you done with your life? What have you done with the resources God has given you? Right? We're judged based on that. Like it says it clear as day that we are judged based on what was written in the books. So it's not that just, we get there and on Judgment Day, like our life meant nothing. Like I think that's a fallacy. That's a lie. That's a misunderstanding of the way the Christian life is supposed to work. Like some people really think that this life just doesn't matter. It does. And you're going to be judged based on what you did with it. How you help people, how you use the resources God gave you. Like it's getting written down. And it says right here that you're going to be judged based on it. Now, you're not going to be judged to punishment. You're going to be judged to reward. But this is eternal reward. Like, it's a big deal. It's not something that you should just shrug off. But then we have the Lamb's Book of Life, which we've seen several times throughout the book of Revelation. And this is the judgment book. Are you part of God's people or not? Are you in the roll call or not? The ancient cities in the Greco-Roman world, cities basically even before, but like the ancient classical Greece all the way up through the Roman times, the cities would keep a running log of who was considered a citizen. And if you weren't considered a citizen, well, you didn't have many rights. But if you were considered a citizen, well, you're right on in. And so we have this book of life, which is the citizen log of heaven, the citizen log of Christ's kingdom. And those who are not found in it are tossed into the lake of fire. And so we see death and Hades are thrown there. So death ultimately is the final thing to die. There's no more dead. So the realm of the dead, Hades, is done away with. And then we get to see the new heaven and new earth. That's what's coming next. That's what's exciting. That's what I'm really excited to teach on. A few things before we wrap up. There's a few branches of interpretation out there that say that resurrection is just a reinterpretation of death. That you can say that when you die, well, that's what being resurrected means. That you are resurrected to life as soon as you die. And that's not what the Bible teaches. It's the point of resurrection is the undoing of death, right? That's why it's such a big deal that Christ came back from the grave, because he undid death. So don't let somebody tell you that otherwise. Like we don't just die and then we're resurrected at Judgment Day. Like that's not the message that the Bible teaches. It's consistent throughout that there is a single day that hasn't happened yet where all the dead are resurrected. So if you have any questions, reach out. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.